Hello there, in this tutorial we'll see how easy it is to create in Photoshop an illustration that looks like a real image, or maybe I should say a 3D image of a piece of fabric with a printed inscription on it and realistic folds of cloth. The technique we'll see is really easy to understand, pretty short to do, and with stunning results. We will see some examples of how to create the folds of fabric, as well as a brief review of the differences between the settings of the burn tool and the dodge tool. Now, this video is mainly intended for those who use a graphic tablet. However, one of the illustrations we'll see here can easily be done with just simple mouse gestures. I leave it to you to figure out which one. So let's get started. First, I take the rectangular selection tool and create a large rectangle. This will be the raw material for a piece of fabric to be created here very soon. Let's choose some dark color. Now let's take the text tool and choose a white font color and write down the word folds for the sake of example. Let's just choose a different font that will fit better with the folds which will be developed here. Align the inscription to the center of the blue background. And merge the two layers together. Let's go to the menu bar, filter, liquify. Set a brush size to an appropriate size and start creating folds. First by drawing some waves on the edges of the fabric, then I move on to the center. Now notice that distortions and folds are applied simultaneously on the fabric and on the letters, since we merged the layers beforehand. This is of course necessary in order to create a realistic appearance of the folds, in addition to the lights and shadows, as we will see shortly. A few more strokes here and there, small waves and curves, and soon we'll move on to the next stage of adding the light and shadows. Now let's move forward for a few seconds in time-lapse mode. That's it. Now let's press OK, and here we go. Let's go over to the burn tool settings panel. There are three modes: shadows, midtones and highlights. We will choose the highlights mode for now. The brush we use has to be a soft one. I start putting shadow lines on the fabric. You might do it whichever direction you wish and see fit, as long as the shadow lines do not collide head-on with each other. You might as well to make them branch out from the same exit point, just like here, as long as they do not intersect. In fact, it doesn't really matter from where to where we draw the shadow lines. In any case, a realistic appearance of folds will be obtained. And that's what's great about using this tool. In certain areas I pass the brush twice or more, because the less monotonous the shading and lighting are, the richer and full of dimension are the folds obtained. As we can see, in a way, the shape of these folds seem to be similar to the folds of a piece of cloth thrown on the floor randomly when viewed from above, unlike the folds of a flag waving in the wind, for example, which look different. Later on this video, we will see another example of folds more similar to those created by waving of a flag. Now, as I've mentioned, the burn tool is set to the highlights mode. Now, while I am on the burn tool, pressing the Alt key switches it to the lighting mode of the dodge tool. So you can basically switch between the burn and dodge tools with just a press of a button. Just as I'm doing right now, that I am pressing the Alt key, using it to switch between burn tool to dodge tool. This way, instead of going to the tools bar, choosing each time the required tool, you just switch between them alternately with a press of a button. Now, as you can see, by using the Dodge tool set to the highlights mode, it results in a look of a satin fabric. That's because of the absolute contrast of the highlights mode. In a minute, we'll see an example where the burn tool is used set on midtones mode, and we'll see the difference in the result. Some touch-ups on the edges with the smearing tool, while the transparency of the layer is locked up so that it doesn't spread out and blur the edges of the fabric. Anyway, for now we have a piece of cloth here with quite a realistic look of fabric folds. Now let's again pass forward in fast speed and be right back with another example. Now another example of an elongated banner with plenty of folds. This time as well I create a long rectangle and give it again a dark background. Let's go to the text tool, change the font color to white and write the word shrinks. That is, fabric shrinks. Let's change the font to something that will fit in better. Merge the two layers and go to the filter tab, liquify, and start adding folds. This time I'll not focus on the accuracy level, rather on the process. But still, it's very easy to do. The technique is the same, except that this time there will be many more folds with a high density. It might look that right now it's in time-lapse speed, but it's not. This is the natural speed. I've just decreased the brush size to very small and move it quickly up and down to create dense creases on the edges of the banner and on the letters themselves. You can see that the letters have lost their shape, which seems like an irreparable deformity, but as soon as we put the lights and shadows, the logical appearance of the letters will be fixed. Let's click the OK button and start moving the shadow brush, meaning the dodge tool, setting it again on the highlights, and start drawing lines from top to bottom. We've already understood how it works, so let's again go through this step in high speed. We're done with the shadowing, so we'll move on to the lightening. Between every two strokes of shadow, I pass a brush stroke of light. It's basically done in the same modality as before, at a higher density however. In the two next examples, we'll get some more concepts regarding the differences between the two modes, highlights and midtones, as well as the appropriate degree of using them on the slightly different conditions. Now let's do something similar and yet different, using for this experiment the US flag that has lines all along it, so it will be intriguing to see how it turns out. In this example, since the size of the brush is large, the process will be much simpler to do even without a graphic pen. That is, it can be easily manipulated even with only a mouse. Basically, what I'm doing here is pulling waves up and down the length of the flag. Soon we'll get to the lightening and shadowing stage. However, this time we'll use a different setting than we used in the previous examples. Let's go over to the Dodge Tool Settings panel. First, I'll select the midtones mode and see how its shadow lines are applied. I reduce the size of the brush and draw a shadow line. You can see that it is not applied to the white area, but to the colored part. So I'll undo it and replace it with the setting we have used so far, the highlights mode. Now you can see how the shadow lines are applied to the white area as well. I move the brush 2 or 3 times as needed for each submerged section of any wave, increasing or decreasing the size of the brush according to the width of any wave. It's that simple. In each submerged part, meaning in each concave part of a wave, I move the shadow brush and leave the convex parts where the waves rise for the lightening strokes, where we'll get to in a moment. We're done with the shadow lines. I'm now on the burn tool. I'll select the midtones setting so that we can see the differences between the results. Pressing the Alt key, I'm switching it to the Dodge tool as I've mentioned before. Now note that when I draw lines of light, when it's on midtones, I get a slightly anemic look here. Just like the current term of the US presidency. But the lighting lines are not bright. It looks like a flag that was photographed after sunset. But of course that midtones mode is also very useful and essential very often. Maybe we'll expand on the subject in another video. In any case, we'll see the difference between the midtones mode, whose lighting is anemic, and the highlights mode, whose contrast is very strong. Anyway, now that we've seen the differences, we'll undo the lighting lines and redo them in highlights mode. And just as one fellow used to put it, let's make America great again. And finally, we'll see one more example. Now we'll see how to create delicate folds that will not be so dominant, such as in case that we place a certain logo or image at the center, that we don't want their shape to be damaged. So for this demo, we'll use the character of the top of our channel, this guy, which is holding the virtual subscribe red button. We'll see where fine lines can be added without damaging its appearance. So let's open it in Liquify, add some strokes on the edges of the fabric. It's a little hard to see it right now because of the light gray shade I've chosen, but after I'll hit the OK button, it will all be clearer. Now I reduced the Liquify brush significantly to such a size that the folds will be minimal. I moved the brush over the virtual red button so that even afterwards it will be possible to understand the inscription on it, and it will remain legible. I also make some strokes on the hat and on the shirt, light strokes, all in a minor way that won't distort the image. Let's click on the OK. Now I'll start with the shading. I reduced the brush to the size of the folds. The brush is currently on midtones mode. The reason that right now the strokes of the shadow are applied even on the bright surface is because its color is a little gray. For an absolute white, no shading would be applied whatsoever. As you remember, by pressing the Alt key, it switches to Dodge tool, this time as well on the midtones. As we've seen in the previous example, we see the somewhat milky result that is obtained here. Again, this is just for demonstration purposes, so let's undo it and redo it again in highlights. That's it for now. I hope you enjoyed and found this tutorial useful. I would recommend you to subscribe to this channel so you'll keep being informed anytime a new video is uploaded. Thank you for watching this video. See you again in the next one.